And welcome back to this week's episode of the MovieBabble Podcast. I am Nick, and I'm joined by Brennan this week. How are you?
Not too bad, not bad. No Colin, but that's all right. We'll
Yeah,
make do.
yeah, he's a little bit on a hiatus. We're giving him a vacation. He's working hard, but it's actually a really busy week this week at the box office. The Valentine's Day weekend is typically like the first really big weekend of the year. A lot of stuff comes out. There's either romance movies or things that are kind of counter programming to those romance movies. So there's actually a lot to talk about this week. So running down the top five here, we have Sonic the Hedgehog, surprisingly doing really well in its first weekend, had a gross over the weekend of 57 million. And then in second place, we have Birds of Prey, or the new title, Harley Quinn: Birds of Prey, which is now at 17 million about. And then in third place, we have Fantasy Island, which I'm very excited to talk about, which is at 12.4 million. Then in fourth place, we have The Photograph, just a shade behind Fantasy Island at a little under 12.3 million. And in last place, still hanging on to the top five, Bad Wars for Life, with a really solid drop, only at about 6%. And its total for the weekend was 11.3. But kind of the headliner of the weekend here was Sonic the Hedgehog, just overcoming the onslaught of memes to become what is basically it's probably a hit at this point. So its budget was 85 million, 85, 90 million. Worldwide gross already is 111 million. This is a shock to me. What about you?
No, this is really good. I didn't quite expect a $57 million weekend. I expected more in the vein of maybe 40 million. And it to still eventually be profitable, but to already be breaking past its budget in the first weekend is pretty impressive. I think that the onslaught of memes helped it I think that actually kind of helped a spread of awareness for this film early on, and I think it just added to a intrigue value, and the reviews were pretty solid, and the audience scores seem to be pretty decent as well. So I expect that this movie will probably actually be quite profitable.
Yeah, I think you're dead on like the meme part of this, because I mean that first trailer came out and everyone just started shitting on it like crazy. Like I was having a ball with it. Everyone was just going nuts, and like all the meme pages everywhere on Instagram, Twitter, everything, they were going nuts just making fun of this movie. And it's one of those things where it was so bad that it ended up being really good for the movie. And then I mean, we've kind of covered this, and everyone's been covering this for a while, but Paramount actually was like, you know what, you're right. You right, internet. We're going to go back and fix this. And they made Sonic actually look like Sonic. And then weirdly, I mean, there's probably a gross underside to this where the reshoots of that only cost about 5 million. So it seems like there was probably a lot of animators working overtime and just not getting paid properly, which I imagine there might be a press release for that at some point. It's tough to speculate on such like a kind of a murky thing, but something isn't quite sitting right with me there, you know. But yeah, it's just like a cinema score. Like it's one of those things where the memes helped. It rocketed to first place.
No, definitely, and I think you're probably right there. The initial reports, they're way off and they were false, but the initial reports were, and this is what had me nervous when they said they were gonna kind of redo everything with Sonic's design. The initial reports were a $35 million add-on to the budget. Apparently that was way wrong, and it's obviously way under that. So that's good for them in the long run, I guess, with profiting off this film. But yeah, there might be something more to that story that we might learn at some point.
Yeah, and it's kind of a win for Paramount, because I feel like I've always been on this podcast just like wondering how on earth their budgets end up how they are, because I remember even before we started doing this podcast, one of the most hilarious things I think I've ever seen was seeing that Daddy's Home 2 had a production budget of like 70 million, which is just like one of the funniest things I've ever heard in my life, where it's just like this totally cheap looking movie with Will Ferrell and Mel Gibson and Mark Wahlberg just phoning it in, and it cost $70 million, which is just insane to me. And Sonic's only 85, 90, so like it looks like they had their stuff in check for this one, all things considered. And I guess that probably helps where a lot of the movie is live action. You guys just have Sonic just like hanging out there as like the one big animated piece of all this. But it seems like weirdly this was like a kind of like a good like risk for them, you know. And they have, I imagine, I mean, I still haven't seen the movie, and I'm kind of catch up with it later this week. But it seems like everything is setting up for. I know that they have their property now, and they're going to probably do more with this. And who knows if Jim Carrey comes back? But yeah, the reviews were good, and people younger. It says that a lot of the reports were that 70% of the audience were under the age of 25, and over half of it was male, which just makes a lot of sense. But it seems like we might be getting more Sonic, which is just so weird considering all the memes of weird human teeth that we were seeing like just a few short months ago. It's a really strange turn of events here.
It's a pretty good glow up for the film. I haven't seen it either. Just had a busy weekend with travel and stuff, but it's one that I'm definitely gonna catch up on early in the week, these next couple of days. But oh my God, it definitely is a weird turn of events for sure.
Yeah, and so the movie also hasn't even opened yet in a few key markets. So it's opening in Russia this coming week. Then it's in Japan in March, and there still is not a date set for China, which is probably the big one here. I think Sonic is kind of one of those. It's kind of one of those properties that I feel like everyone knows about. Like one of those things that's kind of ingrained into the consciousness, even if you didn't really play the video game or anything like that. Like everyone knows about it, so. I don't really know what the popularity of Sonic is in China, but I imagine just having a release there would just help this movie like really, really well. So, yeah,
definitely.
Sonic.
It had a respectable opening overseas as well. 111 million global, so domestic plus international. 111 million total this weekend. That's pretty impressive in and of itself. But I do think definitely a China release will be big for them. I know that a lot of the reasons that there's no release date set is just because of the virus, and I believe a lot of their box office and theaters have been just completely shut down. So I think we're going to be talking a lot about that in the next couple of weeks when Mulan comes out, I think in March, because Disney, I think, should be nervous about that because they don't really know when they're going to get everything up and running there again.
That's actually a great call, and I didn't even actually think of that, which is like we might see a lot of these movies drop at the same time at some point, where you have back to back to back, just create like even the week to week drop offs in China are already crazy as is, but if you have like a glut of these movies that were kind of on hold for release there, and they kind of drop them all at once, like maybe the China angle isn't as big for Sonic as you would have thought, but yeah, it's weird.
I still think it can definitely add a decent chunk though. But yeah, I think that those big drops that we're used to seeing in China are probably going to be even bigger, just considering what they're going to be getting thrown at them with all these bigger films that are going to be on hold. So it is a pretty interesting dynamic. But I do think that it's no matter what, regardless, it's going to be nice for them to get a release there at some point and just make a little bit more cash.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sonic, I guess, is kind of the winner of this week. I just didn't see that at all. Like, just all the gifs that are still out there of the previously animated Sonic. It's just hilarious to me. I'm kind of stunned that this happened. So I don't know. But I guess we'll move on to the number 2 at the box office this week, which is Birds of Prey, or Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn, or as it's now titled, Harley Quinn: Birds of Prey. So there's definitely a lot of rejiggering with this movie, obviously, after its kind of disappointing week last week, where Warner Brothers immediately changed the name last Monday to that Harley Quinn: Birds of Prey, just to kind of maybe get a little more cachet with that. But I guess it's not really, I don't know if it really changed much or anything like that. So it was a 48% drop for Birds of Prey in its second weekend, which, considering what's the other movies that are kind of in the top 10 or even top 20, it's definitely one of the higher ones, considering that Valentine's Day weekend it's whether you're seeing a romantic comedy or anything like that, it's just a big weekend for couples. Like you're kind of buying a ticket for two in a sense, either if they're seeing a horror movie or whatever. So a 48% drop still isn't great. I'm not really willing to still call Birds of Prey a bomb or anything like that. I think we're still very much in a wait and see pattern there. But with the budget around 84.5 million we talked about last week, it's only sitting at 145 million at the moment worldwide too. So it's still not looking great. But I'm still in that mode where I don't really know exactly where we're going to hold up here. So it's definitely still wait and see for me.
I agree. I think one of the reasons for that 48% drop is just that it was a new release last weekend. I think a lot of these other movies here that we're seeing with these small incremental drops are films that have been out for so long. So I would expect even if those movies came out last week, they'd have a similar drop this week to Birds of Prey. So that's kind of just how I'm reading it. I don't think it's a bomb either at all. I think that while it is definitely a slight disappointment on many fronts, I wouldn't call it a bomb either. I do think that it's found its audience though, and I think that it will definitely have a life after its theater run because it's a film that I think is definitely tapped into its audience, and there will be an audience and a fan base for this movie going forward. But yeah, $17 million this weekend is not an awful take, and I think that they will be okay in the long run. Apparently, there was also only a 50% drop in overseas markets, which is apparently pretty good. Usually, drops in the overseas markets are a lot higher than in the domestic markets, but that might be a decent sign for them. But yeah, it's not a great look right now, 145 million worldwide, but I think that in the end, it's not going to be the big flop that it was crowned as.
Yeah, so it's so true because I think we all get caught up in like, oh, like what are the box office returns on a lot of these tentpole movies, but just the merchandising and all that is such a huge part of like all of this, and yeah, there's definitely a lot of possibilities there with Harley Quinn and Birds of Prey and whatnot. So if anything, if it gets close to breaking even, which for this I assume is probably right around the 250 mark worldwide, something like that, 250 maybe 300. I don't think the marketing costs weren't too bad. This wasn't really like a pervasive uh, marketing campaign like that we see with like some of the bigger Marvel movies or anything like that. So I don't suspect that the marketing costs were too bad here. So anywhere around 250, and then after that you kind of see what merchandising is and see where if you cut your losses or maybe you rejigger it for another time around. I think yeah, it's certainly a wait and see. I don't know. It's a pretty fun movie. I wish more people would check it out, but what can you do?
Yeah, no, it's a good time. It's a good time for sure.
Yeah. So moving on to another movie I didn't get a chance to see, but I am really looking forward to it considering the really bad buzz it has, and that is Fantasy Island, uh, the Blumhouse horror movie based on Fantasy Island, which is just hilarious to me. Uh, so in typical Blumhouse fashion, this movie was really cheap. It's made already 21.6 million worldwide, and it cost 7 million. So it's probably already made its budget back, or definitely made its budget back, but maybe the marketing costs as well, depending on how much it spent there. It's kind of the MO for Blumhouse, which is kind of weird because this is actually a Sony release, even though it's through Blumhouse. I don't really know if there's. I haven't been keeping up on the studio, like the production ties. If maybe Universal was like, no, we're good on this, so they just Blumhouse went to Sony and they were like, yeah, sure, we'll take a horror movie. But it's doing okay, and that's just kind of it really is just. I mean, even with something like Gretel and Hansel, which we barely talked about on this pod, like it costs like nothing, and it's doing okay, but that's enough considering where all the expenses were going into it. I can't wait to see this movie because I woke up to shout out to Spencer Henderson, beloved contributor to here to MovieBabble, but I woke up to a text from him saying The Grudge greater than Fantasy Island, which is just hilarious to me. So I can't wait to see this movie. What are your thoughts about it?
You know what? Besides, obviously, I think I actually skipped the three horror films so far this year that have kind of been absolute bombs with audiences and critics alike, which was The Turning and The Grudge, and now this. However, out of the three, and I'm still going to make a point to go back and watch them over the next few weeks, especially as they either hit streaming or hit on demand or something like that, or some other kind of lower cost theaters. But Fantasy Island is the one out of the three that I want to see the most. I don't know. It just seems like it's the most fun. But no, a $7 million budget. Just looking at it from an economic standpoint, this film's in a fine place, and that's kind of the Blumhouse model, right?
Yeah, so it was. So this movie is directed by Jeff Wadlow. So that name probably doesn't ring a bell, and deservedly so. But his last movie was Truth or Dare. Remember that movie from whatever 3 years ago with the Snapchat filters for scary faces? It's the same thing where that movie was so bad and it was hilariously bad and just it's every kind of move towards horror in that movie was just hilariously miscalculated and so funny at all times. And I'm kind of hoping that this is the same thing. And it seems like that because all the people who saw this movie, their first reactions were like, "LOL, what is life?" after seeing this movie. And it's sitting like at like a 9% last time I checked on Rotten Tomatoes, which is just hilarious to me. They're doing something right in all the wrong ways. If like when a score gets that low. So yeah, Truth or Dare was fucking hilarious, and weirdly the same star, Lucy Hale, is the lead in both of these movies, both Blumhouse movies. But it also just shows the power of maybe not the Blumhouse brand, but that model of making movies where it keeps having you lets you have a job in Hollywood, where that Truth or Dare cost like $4 million to make, and that movie made somewhere around 40-50 million. So that's, no matter how you look at it, it was terrible, but it's a one-off high concept horror movie that just did really well at the box office, and that'll probably get you more work in this industry. And we're seeing it again with Fantasy Island, and it's starting up.
I'll blow your mind a little bit. You said try 40-50 with Truth or Dare. Try 90 on a budget of $3 million.
Yeah, and that's so fucking absurd. Like, and stuff like that where Blumhouse just knows how to market a movie, and Jason Blum has it down where you have that kind of that marketable premise, and how silly this is that there's a horror movie about Fantasy Island. Like, it definitely struck a chord with some people where it's just memorable, even if it looks really stupid. So it's it's just amazing. Like I imagine this movie. I mean, the C- Cinema Score. Cinema Score is not like a great kind of barometer for horror movies, considering some people are just like, man, that scared me, I don't like it, and they give it like a low Cinema Score. So I mean, obviously the critics have not been kind to this movie, neither has basically anyone else. So there's definitely some truth to it, but I suspect that this movie might just hang around for a while. It'll do the typical thing where next week it'll probably make like 6 or 7 million, maybe like 15 worldwide, and it will kind of look at this. We probably won't talk about this movie again on the pod, but you'll kind of see it in like 8th or 9th place for a while, and it's like, oh yeah, it made 50 million. It's actually making more money. So it's so weird. That's just the nature of horror these days.
Yeah, it's definitely a good business model.
Absolutely. So I can't wait to see that. We might have to do I might want to talk about this more again next week when I actually get a chance to see it. So I'm seeing it tonight, and I can't wait. I'm so excited. I'm weirdly very excited for it. So we'll see. But moving on to number 4 here is The Photograph, which is the big romantic movie of the week, which also did pretty solid business. This one's for Universal, so it made about a little under 14 million worldwide on a budget of 16 million. So that's a pretty solid kind of risk there. 2 really likable leads, Lakeith Stanfield and Issa Rae. I know you saw this movie, so what are your thoughts?
You know what? It's a good film, and it definitely goes for something a little bit different than what you'd expect from a Valentine's Day romantic film. It's very serious in tone. I definitely enjoyed it. I think that they're very charming, Issa Rae and Lakeith Stanfield. They're really charming in the lead roles, and them kind of alone just carry this film all the way. But there's also a really neat a cultural story within this film as well, and I also really enjoyed the score that went along with this film. It's kind of like old jazz, like Louisiana jazz a little bit, and it really sets the tone because it's not like there's some funny moments in here. There's Lil Rel Howard's in this, or Howery's in this film, from the Get Out fame. The TSA guy. He's in this. And I had no idea he was in this, but he pops on screen and the whole audience in the theater started laughing. So he's in there for some comedy, but this is a very serious film for kind of a rom-com. It kind of is more in the vein of a drama. Obviously there's comedy throughout, but it definitely goes for a serious tone. And I think that helped it and hurt it a little. I mean, I respected the movie and what it was going for. I thought it was telling a good story, but it definitely dragged a little at times. But no, definitely this was a good film and an enjoyable one for the Valentine's Day time, and I was impressed with it. So I'm just glad I got to watch a quality film instead of something crap, because usually those Valentine's Day movies, they can be rough sometimes.
Yeah, I feel like I watched this trailer whenever this came out. I didn't really know anything about this movie, and I saw the trailer ahead of some movie. It might have been like Last Christmas, which remember that movie from November of last year. That
Yeah.
but it kind of the trailer I thought was really great to this movie. It feels really romantic, and I mean like I feel like anytime Lakeith Stanfield is in a movie, you should pay attention to it because I mean he's just so versatile, and he was in that Someone Great movie, that Netflix rom-com last year that was like surprisingly pretty good, even though it was like the typical Netflix, like you really don't need to pay attention to it, but you can still get the gist of it. He's great. He's great in just about everything. And same with Issa Rae. Like I'm really looking forward to this movie as well. And I'm curious to see how it does in like the next few weeks as well. Because I was talking to my girlfriend, shout out to my girlfriend. But I was like, hey, like, do you want to see anything this weekend? And I was like, oh, how about like The Photograph? And she was like, no, it looks like shit. I was like, oh, all right. So I don't know. Maybe there's something that's not quite connecting with people there, but it's doing all right box office wise. I mean, there's definitely some work to be done here. It hasn't quite made its budget back, but marketing costs weren't too nuts in this movie, so I can't imagine this was a crazy investment for Universal. So, yeah, it's pretty standard. You have a romance movie every Valentine's Day. It just makes sense, all things considered. So, this was the one this year, and it looked like it did all right.
No, for sure. No, I'm glad it was this one. I mean, it was good. It was good for sure.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to catching up with that one. And so in fifth place is a movie that we've kind of talked to death, but it just hangs around. Is Bad Boys for Life with a 5.9% drop over the weekend. Just great stuff for this movie. 11.3 million, as I mentioned at the beginning of this pod. It just won't go away. I mean, there's really not much to discuss about it other than like, yeah, this movie is just really profitable and people like it. But it feels like every single week is just kind of it just sheds another light on that. People just like love this and they're going back to see it multiple times, and it just for me it just shows how strongly like everyone loved those first two Bad Boys movies. It is really striking to me.
Yeah, I mean this is crazy. It's gonna be probably hitting 400 million soon enough. It's at 370 million worldwide now, 181 million dollars domestically. I mean, this is a absolute hit, and it's kind of saving the 2020 box office in a way. I mean, early on, I was reading a lot of reports how 2020 is expected to be a big down year compared to the last few, but February reports are now saying that actually 2020 might be on par, and they cite Bad Boys for Life is one of the big surprises for that, because this film was definitely not expected to be a $400 million hit, but here we are, and it's good for the box office.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of that speculation comes from. We don't have like the big like there's no Infinity War Endgame type of thing this year. Like the big one for Marvel is Black Widow coming out in May, and then we'll kind of see what Eternals is from there. But there is kind of more unknown with this year. So. But yeah, it's also a very, like, quietly a very good start to this quarter, or even like the beginning of, when you include last year or last December, just a really good start for Sony in all of this. So yeah, they had Bad Boys under their belt. They have the continued success of Jumanji, which is still just doing really well and actually went up at the box office this week at a 2.6% increase in its intake for the week. And then you also had the aforementioned Fantasy Island, which is against all just things that make sense in this world, is just doing really well at the box office. So for all, and even Little Women is still around too as well, getting a little bit of that post Best Picture nominee bump. So strangely, and we love to kind of shit on Sony for everything they do, but they're doing really well. So good for them.
Yeah, I want to go on a quick little tangent real quick, just because you brought up Jumanji and its increase. And Sony and all that. At the beginning of the year, last year, it feels like I just did this like a month ago, but like around this time last year, I dropped a bold box office predictions for 2019. I don't know if you remember that article.
I do. It was my favorite article of last year.
I predicted, I mean, this was kind of a mix of a lot of things. It was a mix of, at the time, no one knew how Star Wars Episode 9 was going to do at the box office, and it was a mix of how shocking Jumanji the first one did at the box office, or Welcome to the Jungle did at the box office. I called Jumanji actually doing better at the box office than Star Wars, and sadly, I was off by about $300 million. However, however, you look at these two films right now, and Jumanji, which came out a week before Star Wars, is outpacing it by like 500% right now. I'm so upset. Like, I wish that because there was a time where Star Wars was just making more money than Jumanji, but Jumanji was having lower drops. Then just Star Wars kind of fell off and Jumanji overtook it. It just happened too late. I'm so upset.
Yeah, I mean, even comparatively, like even to save face for you a little bit, like everyone does feel like they're a little disappointed with The Rise of Skywalker. Like no one's happy with that movie. Like it's barely, like I say this like it's the worst thing in the world, but it's barely over $1 billion. But it's not even at 1.1 billion, which when you compare that to something like even the last two, like Force Awakens and Last Jedi, like it's just been a rapid decline. Like I think even Last Jedi, which is a movie that apparently that still no one likes, but I feel like there's like slowly converts over time as we weed out all the Russian bots. That movie still made $1.6 billion. So this is, yeah. But even Jumanji, everyone just seems happy with it. I mean, obviously there's far less stakes involved with that kind of movie, but everyone just kind of goes and sees it, and they're pleasantly happy with it. And like Kevin Hart does funny things, and The Rock plays against type, and that's kind of all you want with it. So I would say you were right in one way or another. I'm giving you credit for it.
I appreciate it. Half right, at least.
Yeah, there you go. So we'll move on to one of the other new releases of this week, which came in at the number 10 spot, which was Downhill, the Will Ferrell, Julia Louis-Dreyfus vehicle, the remake of the hit, I think it's a Swedish film, Force Majeure, which came out a few years ago. Didn't do great, actually. So this movie, it's from the artist formerly known as Fox Searchlight Pictures, just Searchlight Pictures now. It was in about 2,300 theaters here in the U.S. and it only cracked about 4.6 million. I don't really know what tracking was on this, but that's definitely not great, and especially for a movie that stars those two just really prominent comedy leads.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen it, but I know that the original, the Swedish film, is pretty good, and it was a hit when it came out, and it was pretty well liked. This film dropped pretty quick after Sundance. Did you get a chance to see it at Sundance, or did you see it this weekend?
Yeah, so it was actually funny because I knew it was coming out this weekend, so I was like, I don't really need to see that at Sundance since like the wait is so short. I mean, there's a lot of other movies you have no idea when they're coming out, and even last week we didn't even talk about it, but it was a movie called The Lodge which released, and I saw that movie at Sundance 2019, and it released after Sundance this year. So just you never know when these things come out. But yeah, so I caught up with it this week, and I actually watched Force Majeure for the first time before seeing it because I only heard great things, and if you're going to see this movie, it's worthy to compare the two. And yeah, it's just Force Majeure is just a better movie in every sense of the word. We say this all the time where there's American remakes of just really great and kind of almost transcendent foreign films, and this is just kind of that, where they put two great stars in it, and it makes sense why these people would sign on to it because it's just at a ski resort. It's just you just have a free vacation while you're shooting a movie. It's like a higher class version of what Adam Sandler does in all his movies, where this one has like the Searchlight banner, and there's like some prestige to it because it's based off of a really good Swedish movie and all that. And but it's basically the same thing where it's just like, hey, like, do you guys want to just like film in like the Alps somewhere for a few weeks? And Will Ferrell's like, sure, why not? So yeah, like the first Force Majeure, so I guess I should do the kind of the inciting incident for both films here, because it's actually one of the more inventive ones. So it's kind of, this movie's built as a new kind of disaster movie, which is really funny because this family's just chilling at their ski lodge, and they're eating some like lunch or whatever, some kind of meal, and there's like a controlled avalanche coming down from the mountains that a lot of places do, just to kind of evenly distribute snow throughout the mountains so people can ski properly, and it keeps building and building, and it looks like it's gonna even just swarm all over them and turn into a real avalanche. And so Will Ferrell or the just the fatherly figure, if we're looking at both films here, the first reaction is to grab his phone and run away from the family. And so when the dust settles and everything's actually fine, the whole family's just like, what the fuck? Like, you left us? Like, what are you doing? And it kind of starts this kind of like this downward spiral for this family. And it looks like kind of what people do and those split second moments. And can you really trust someone until those things come? And I think force majeure is a really interesting layered discussion of this, where it's a lot about masculinity and about how, like, a lot of it's about that survival aspect, and if it's necessarily like the man should be the protector at all times, and it's really clumsy in like the best way possible. All the characters are just like waves of emotion, and they don't know how to feel about each other, and it's a really good juxtaposition of like this really beautiful place and just a crumbling connection with these people. So Downhill, there's a little bit of that. There's a couple scenes that are just kind of shot for shot the same thing over and over again, which you kind of see with a lot of these movies. And I think a lot of them kind of hope that you didn't see the first movie, so they just kind of recreate that same energy, or try to at least. But it's just not as interesting of a movie. There's far more layers to the conflict in force majeure, where there's masculinity and just there's so much different stuff. And this movie is just kind of Will Ferrell trying to go dramatic. Julia Louis-Dreyfus is also doing the same, but the material isn't quite there. It feels like they do the thing where they make the relationship drama more. It's just easier to comprehend in a lot of ways. Like there's cheating stuff in there, and in the first movie, there's even no inkling that either of these two people are going to cheat on each other, which is actually one of the more interesting pieces of that movie, where it's all kind of internal conflict and them struggling with each other. And so this movie, it's just kind of the safer, less. It's not quite daring. It's the other, and Force Majeure is a little more fraught. There's a lot more stuff going on there. This movie, it's just fine. Nothing really. I'm not really like enthused. Like, I don't have a big reaction to it either way or anything like that. But it's just kind of there, and it seems like the reactions to it are similar, where people are like, I don't really know what to make of this. Like, it doesn't really quite live up to people who love force majeure, and for people who are just kind of going to see it as its own self, it's kind of bland and low energy. It doesn't have like that emotional layering that you would kind of hope for. So it didn't surprise me to see this movie not perform well this weekend.
It kind of sounds like a decent role for Will Ferrell, though. Just by you saying it, just a clumsy guy who would grab the phone and run away from the family.
Yeah,
I could picture him doing that.
Yeah, and it's that scene. It's actually funny. I think both of those, when you compare those two scenes together, how they're shot, I think it's a great encapsulation of what makes these two movies different and what makes Force Majeure better. Because there's like a little bit, the way it's filmed in Force Majeure is there's a kind of, you don't quite see him run away, like the dust settles and you kind of maybe see him move, like you move in the opposite direction, but it's not quite as clear. I mean, it's definitely still like, oh yeah, he left his family, but it's not, there's that little bit of doubt, and I think that kind of benefits the father character, which in both movies, the father character is like, no, I didn't leave you. What are you talking about? Like, that's your truth. My truth is I was there for you. And the way that's filmed in Force Majeure just kind of lends itself better to that. This one, it's like, oh, it's like a comedy bit. Will Ferrell just lunges out of the bench and runs away. Other than that, it's definitely one of the more dramatic roles from Will Ferrell. Like, he's not being goofy Will Ferrell. There's definitely moments of that, but he's definitely trying to be that kind of like that dad figure, and maybe he's channeling that everything must go or Stranger Than Fiction energy.
Right.
So it is interesting from that aspect, because you don't get to see that side of him a lot. But it's just fine. You would just hope that this movie, with all the talent involved, would just be a little better than it is.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, I mean, I'll probably check out Force Majeure before I even think about checking out Downhill.
Yeah, that's definitely the right way to go. It puts you in the right frame of mind for this movie and kind of understand like the forces of play. No pun intended, I guess, with the title there. But it's just a better movie. And I think maybe Downhill works for people who don't really know about Force Majeure. Maybe that's a possibility. But The cinema score wasn't really great for it, so it was like I think it's like a D cinema score. So yeah, not great all around. I don't really think this movie satisfied anybody. So
Yeah, I know.
uh, yeah, so I guess we'll kind of move on to our last point here. Or actually, no, we have actually a kind of a crowded slate here. We want to touch on Parasite really quickly. So after the big time win, big time Bong energy after the win, Best Picture win, Parasite just it came back into 2,000 screens this week, made about 5.5 million, and I just love all of this. It's just so great to see this movie perform really well. It's getting closer to 50 million here in the U.S. Which for this kind of movie, I mean, even just like subtitles, but just kind of the stuff it deals with. It's just so cool to see this movie. It's probably going to cross 200 million worldwide at some time soon, since it's kind of going all over the place now because people are dying to see it. I just love seeing this. This is just such a great fallout from the Oscars, and it seems like people are already interested in seeing it and getting acclimated to world cinema. It's just really cool to see.
No, yeah, 234% jump from last weekend's crazy. They doubled their theater count. They had 5.5 million. This is big, and I saw reports out of Australia. Some people tweeting some numbers out of Australia that it's in its 34th week in Australia because it came out right after Cannes back in May in Australia, and its best weekend at the box office was this past weekend. So I remember at the beginning of the season, Bong said it's a local award show, but it really has had some international impact. And from that smile, I think he was just saying that because he loved it. He loved these few months in the stateside, and you could see that on his face, especially when he got that screenplay victory. That's a great gift now.
Yeah, and even the meme of him making his multiple Oscars kiss, like everything about Parasite winning is so wholesome, and I love all of it, and it just seems like, I know maybe there's like some people who didn't think Parasite should win. It wasn't my out of the Best Picture nominees. I really liked the film and even loved it, but it definitely wasn't my favorite. But just kind of like this overall picture of this, like it is such a cool choice to win Best Picture. I love all of this. Even like just for casual movie fans, like people who watch the Oscars, for as much as we kind of poo-poo the Oscars and say it's stupid and it doesn't matter, like it does matter to a lot of people, and they use it as a barometer for like, oh, this is what quality is. And even like someone like my brother who he's interested, like he really likes movies, but he doesn't go out and see like 100 movies throughout the year, but he hadn't seen Parasite, and he watched the Oscars and kind of saw how cool it was to see Bong win and how overwhelmingly happy he was. And he was like, wow, I need to watch Parasite like this week. And so that definitely has that influence for a lot of people, and maybe that leads to more people watching just more of Bong's work and other Korean movies and other world cinema just from around the world. As the way I see it, there's only good that can come from this.
Yeah, I mean, just two quick stats to throw at you again. I mean, yeah, obviously great gross for this film so far, but it was the cheapest movie budget-wise out of all 9 of the Best Picture nominees, standing at $11 million US. So to be up now at around 200 million globally, almost hitting 50 million domestically, that's big. Also, it's the 4th highest grossing foreign film in the United States in history. I don't remember all the ones that are ahead of it. I know Hero is one of the films ahead of it. And I know that Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is one of them, but it's 4th now on that list. So this film's definitely chugging along, and it's just making a ton of money.
Yeah, and I guess parting shots, just go see Parasite if you haven't already. It's really great, and even just go into it with knowing nothing. It's terrific. This makes me so happy. I was so geeked when this movie won Best Picture. I was so happy, and I still am. So this is me in a good mood. So we'll move on to our last topic here, which is the re-release of Portrait of a Lady on Fire. So this movie came out kind of for an awards qualifying run last year in December, kind of limited theaters in New York and LA. Now it's getting its actual release, so it released in 22 theaters here in the U.S. and started off pretty well. It made almost $500,000 on those screens, so that's not too bad. About 20,000 per screen there. Another neon movie, but this movie has built up quite a cult following since like even since Cannes last year when it also premiered and won the best screenplay award there and everything like that. It's I really hope this movie does well and expands. I think it has a chance to, since maybe this is me living in the film Twitter bubble of it all, but I think a lot of people can find a lot of great things in this movie. I rewatched it this weekend, and it is just fucking tremendous. It's better the second time around, and I know we're not at a point where just any foreign film gets like recognition at the Oscars and things like that, but this is the best looking movie of the year, and it should have been nominated for best cinematography overwhelmingly. I know that's like obviously that wasn't going to happen, but just so many great things. Acting across the board, directing is staggeringly good. I really hope people go see this movie because it's so tremendous.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see how much it expands. I doubt it's going to get upwards of 1,000 theaters, but it could definitely get into several hundred theaters, I think, at best, and it's definitely going to make some good money just because of the great buzz. I mean, this is one of the best reviewed movies of 2019. Like, it's top notch, right up there with Parasite and some other films that were just acclaimed across the board from critics and other kind of guilds. But Portrait of a Lady on Fire definitely is a film that I'm looking forward to. That's a great take this weekend, $440,000. Great take for sure. It's coming out up here in Canada next week, so I'll have to wait a little bit, just another week or so, but I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, my guess is this will probably top out around like 500 screens, maybe. I mean, even for like all the things we say great about Parasite, like it's a pretty accessible movie and it's very thrilling and energetic. This movie I think is definitely accessible, but it's not quite that same energy. It's definitely quieter. There's no score in the movie, which makes for really interesting atmosphere throughout it. But I think it will test the patience of more people, other than like Parasite or anything like that. But it is really terrific, and I'm still bummed. I really liked Lady Ali, I don't know how you say her name, but her take on Les Mis, the French a movie that was nominated for Best International Film at the Oscars. But this movie is just fucking great. Like I watched it again. Like I said, like it's probably in my top 3 of the year, or like from last year retroactively. I think it was like 4 or 5 or something like that. But just everything about this movie is really terrific. There's every line of dialogue means like 2 or 3 things at the same time. Yeah, like I said, performances are outrageous. It's really terrific. Like I can't overstate it at all. It is just so great.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So I guess with that, we'll wrap it up for this week. Like I said, go see Portrait of a Lady on Fire, Parasite, all the good stuff. I guess next week we'll reconvene to talk about Brahms 2 or The Boy 2, whatever the title of that fucking thing is. We'll see the sequel to a movie no one asked for. So sure, and then we'll see Call of the Wild as well with Harrison Ford, a documentary where they just captured him in nature yelling at something, and then they put a CGI dog in there, which is the fanfic that I'm just
may not be catching that.
That's the fanfic that I'm going with on that movie. So yeah, a little bit of a light week next week. So hopefully we have a chance to catch up on some of the things. But as always, you can check us out on the site at MovieBabbleReviews.com. We always have great content there. And Brennan, thank you for joining me this week. And until next time, we will see you.